You're listening to Leisure World Direct. I'm your host, GRF Communications Manager Emma DiMaggio, and I'm joined by Executive Director Jessica Sedgwick and Executive Manager of Mutual Services Dave Potter. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Today's topic is governance and how this community is governed. There are many decisions to be made in such a large community, and when it comes to GRF, there's a certain structure to that. Who does make the decisions in GRF? How does that work?
Well, if you're talking about GRF, the Golden Rain Foundation, that would be ultimately the board of directors for the Golden Rain Foundation. But if we're talking about governance broadly for the whole of Leisure World Seal Beach, as the executive manager of Mutual Services, I am compelled to point out that we have the Golden Rain Foundation and we have the 16 individual mutuals in here as well. So if you are a resident, you are going to interact and be under the jurisdiction of both the board of directors for your individual mutual and for the board of directors for the Golden Rain Foundation as a whole. And depending on what your issue is, that would depend on which governance path you're going to have to pursue. If it's something to do with your actual living home in that immediate area, 99.99% of the time, that is a mutual board issue, and you're going to go through that path. If it's something to do with the broader common area of the community, the golf course, the aquatic center, one of the clubhouses, the streets, the roads, GRF staff, that's something to go on the GRF path and go to the GRF board of directors. So I think I answered a question, but it wasn't the question that you asked me. Sorry about that.
Yeah. In those two slices, the mutual boards and the GRF board, how do those board members get elected or come to be in their positions?
You have to, as you would in a municipal election, you have to submit yourself as a candidate, and then the members of that particular entity vote on those candidates and elect their board of directors.
If we pivot to GRF board only, can you tell me about some of the decisions that are made at that level? I know you said that it was, amenities, land, financial decisions, I assume. Can you kind of give a broad overview of the kinds of decisions they make?
I mean, I would say the biggest and most important decision that they make is, of course, the annual budget. That really kind of drives and creates the frameworks for the decisions that they make throughout the rest of the year. Is at the end of the day, if you're wanting to do something that costs money, is it in the budget or is it not in the budget? And what are the ramifications of the answers for that question? But yes, they'll maintain the common area, which are all the clubhouses, all the GRF streets, the gates, the aquatic center, golf course, the physical buildings that house GRF staff, the amphitheater and the shows. Those are all decisions that they make generally in the context of what their budget is for the year.
And these are all GRF residents?
Yes. Yes, how GRF's board is structured is something akin to a senatorial model, if you will, for the United States Senate, which is that every mutual gets one delegate. Every mutual elects that delegate. The exception to that are mutuals 1 and 2. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is that mutuals 1 and 2 are substantially bigger than all the other mutuals in here, so they get 2 delegates. The other reason for that is that mutuals 1 and 2 were the first ones built, and when they wanted to have a board way back in those days, they wanted to make sure that they had enough people to really have a functioning board. So those 2 mutuals, because of their size and because they were the first ones built, have 2 delegates, because back in the early 1960s, that was the way to make sure that you had, 4 or 5 people instead of 2 or 3 people who were making the decisions.
Interesting. And since these are residents, I know that this is like a broad variety of topics and decisions that they're making. Not all of them, I assume, have leadership experience or financial experience or contracting experience or all of these different topics. I'm sure that they have expertise amongst them that covers a wide swath of topics. But how do the other board members, what's the process to inform the board members on the decisions that they're making so that they can make an informed decision for the community?
Well, every board member, of course, brings their own life experiences. And yes, not everybody's experienced at everything, to your point. But hopefully you have a good mix of prior experiences among the board so that you have somebody who maybe has a bit of a financial background. You have somebody who may have worked in construction at some point. You have all these various skill sets that can come together in the body, and they can use that expertise and experience to help everybody make decisions. A board will also always look for outside experts to help them out. If you have a legal question, GRF has a general counsel. You look to your counsel to guide you on a legal question. There's an insurance broker if you have an insurance question. You don't need to be an expert at everything in order to be on a board of directors and serve. You have to have an open mind and a willingness to listen to, seek out, and engage with actual experts in these particular areas.
In addition to those experts, we also have hired staff that GRF has brought on board that has expertise in certain situations between, service maintenance, our physical properties department, recreation, administration, finance. We hire people with that experience that can help to inform the board as well.
It's my understanding that the governance kind of works like a city would with a committee structure as well. Can you go over some of the committees that exist in Leisure World?
So for the Golden Rain Foundation, there are 5 current standing committees that have governance responsibilities. There's a facilities committee, which is what it sounds like. They do all the work on the maintenance of the facilities. There's an operations committee that oversees the operational aspects of the Golden Rain Foundation. There is an administration committee, which oversees the administrative work, if you will. So that has to do with personnel or legal matters or items relating to rules and regulations. There's a finance committee that is tasked with kind of looking at the daylighting for the financial issues and exploring that and kind of poking at the monthly reports to see how we're at. And there is a recreation committee that oversees all of the aspects that have to do with amphitheater stuff and things like that.
The recreation committee is also, it's our member services committee specifically. And so we deal a lot with just member services in that committee. So yes, recreation, member resources, etc.
How do people end up in a committee?
So to be on a committee, you have to be on the board. So all of our committees are made up of the board of directors. So essentially each committee is kind of a subset of the board of directors. So we have an 18-member board. The committees are typically 7 to 8 members that are made up from the board members.
How does one person end up on one committee versus another? Do they have a choice, or is it a communal decision who goes on what committee?
The president ultimately makes decisions on who's on a committee. The board then ratifies those decisions. I know that the president tries to take into account requests that fellow directors may have on interest. It's a really hard balancing act to hit, and I'm sure that no president is able to keep everybody happy every term of a board. And I don't envy them having that particular power or decision-making ability.
So once board members are appointed to their board, can you kind of take me through an issue comes up? It, I assume, goes first to a committee and how it kind of flows through that process.
Issues can come up through a variety of different things. It could be brought up from a committee member themselves, the chair of the committee. Each committee does have a chair, one board member who's been appointed into that position to help run that committee. Issues can also be brought to the committee by staff. So essentially an issue will come up. It'll go to the chair of that committee, who will review it, part of setting their agenda, put it on the agenda for the committee to discuss. It'll be talked about in the committee level, and from there, depending on what needs to be done, it'll either go back to staff to get bids, come back with costs. If it's something that is ready to be pushed onto the board of directors, then it'll be voted on, approved to be sent to the full board for final decision.
Are there instances where discussion occurs in a committee, then it goes to the board, and there's not really consensus, and it goes back to a committee for more discussion?
Yes. I think that's natural with the size of the body and the diverse opinions that you'll have. The point of the committee structure, in my opinion, is to help ensure that something that gets brought before the full board has been vetted and looked at by a large number of people on the board who believe that something should happen. That, of course, doesn't guarantee that the full board will then believe that something should happen. There may be some new information that comes out or a perspective that comes out in board debate that even the committee didn't consider and will result in a large vote to send it back down to committee level for additional consideration.
How can residents get involved in this process? I'm thinking of just issues that they want to lend their voice to or share opinions on at a committee level or board level. How do they get involved in that way, or in just, governance as a whole?
I mean, these meetings are all posted in open meetings, so residents are welcome to attend. They're certainly welcome to, during the member comment period, offer their opinion up and share that with the committee members or the board members. And at the end of the day, board members are elected officials. If their constituents are telling them something, they will listen to it. They may not agree with it, or they may say there's a broader picture here that causes me to make a decision contrary to what you're saying. But any director I've ever spoken to, they want to hear from the residents and hear what the residents have to say. They're here trying to make decisions for the betterment of the community, and it's hard to do that in a vacuum without feedback.
Yeah. In addition to speaking up during the member comment period, we do have email addresses set up for each of the committees and for the board that can be used to email in your issue directly to that committee or to the board. Typically, usually going through the committee first is the best way to go about an issue through a process, is trying to go through the committee process, because then it can be a little bit easier looked at than if it goes to the full board. The board can look at it, and chances are they may send it back to committee. So if you start with committee, the committee can look at that issue. There's a member correspondence section on each of the committee agendas where they will review any correspondence that they receive and make a decision if they're going to bring that to the next committee level, committee meeting or not, for further discussion.
Can you tell me a little bit more, for people who aren't familiar with city governance or governance in Leisure World and the GRF, what an agenda is and what it contains and how they can access one?
Sure. So a municipal government like a city council or a state board, they have a similar rule to a common interest development in that every meeting has to have an agenda, meaning here are the list of topics that are going to be discussed and or voted on in this meeting, and that agenda has to be publicized. For common interest developments, for an open session meeting, it's 4 days prior to, no later than 4 days prior to the meeting, and for an executive session, no later than 2 days prior to the meeting. This allows the members to see what's on the agenda and determine if there's something there that they want to speak about or something that they're interested in coming to attend. It's designed to create a more open environment so that the community understands what's going on. Now, the flip side of it is it restricts the ability of a board to act nimbly on things. So if you're in a meeting and a resident were to bring something up that is actual, and everybody's in agreement, that's a great idea, you can't actually act on it if it's not on the agenda already. The action that you take is you put it on the agenda for the next meeting, and there's a, however long it is to that next meeting, wait until you have the ability to do that. And in staff, we see that sometimes even in committee meetings. Mm-hmm. When you were talking about what's an example of something, we had an issue here with enforcing a policy or a rule, and a resident got caught up in it and thought that it wasn't entirely fair. And in reviewing it, I will say on behalf of staff here was an unintended consequence of the rule, and it wasn't fair to that situation that they were in. We brought that to the admin committee, and the admin committee agreed, but it wasn't on their agenda in that moment. So we have to agendize it for the next meeting, and this situation takes another 30 days before they can even take action on it, and then they would have to kick it to the full board for full resolution at that point. So it provides a lot of openness to have the agenda process, and I'm a fan of it. The downside of it is that it will now spread things out a little longer in terms of getting to a resolution.
Exactly. And in addition to just what is on the agenda, where you can find the agendas, because I think that becomes a big question too, is we post all of our agendas on the resident portal for all members to be able to access. So, and we go a step forward than what we're actually legally required to do. So our legal requirement is just to post the agenda with the topics listed, nothing else. And we do post that on our website, on the calendar page for our regular website. But we do go a step further, and we include backup information for each of those agenda items in the resident portal. So a lot of our items will have action requests that'll have background information, financial impact, recommended resolutions, and we include those in the packet. So that way, the members who are looking at this agenda can go to that backup and see a little bit more of what this topic means. We also take a little step further, and even on the agenda, sometimes we will have proposed resolutions. So even without going to look at the backup information, you can get a good idea of what it is the board is looking to vote on. And that goes above and beyond what we are actually legally required to do in the California Civil Code. And
Very
we do
nice.
that for transparency purposes, so members, of course, can see what is going on. Unfortunately, we can't post everything on there, but we do try to give as much as we can.
Yeah. So people can research a little bit before they decide to come to a meeting or make a comment, or maybe even just to follow the decision-making process.
Yes.
When are the meetings held? How often are committee meetings and board meetings?
Monthly.
All of them.
Generally speaking.
All of them.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, they're monthly. On occasion, we may cancel a meeting. So every month there's typically a committee meeting. There's an executive session meeting of the board, which, to be clear, that is the one meeting that is not open to members. That is board only. It is a closed session. And there's one of those every month, and there's a general session open meeting, which members are able to come to. Typically, we won't have a meetings in the month when elections happen, and sometimes, depending on the year and what's going on in December, the board will typically go dark those months.
Are there any misconceptions that you hear often about how GRF is governed?
A misconception that I hear from time to time is the level of power or authority that staff may have in the governance. Staff is here to manage the day-to-day operations of the foundation. The governance, the establishment of the policies that we look to do our job, to understand where our authority comes from and ends, that comes from the board of directors. So if we're saying yes or no on things, it's generally because there's a policy that directs us that here's what the foundation is going to do and here's what the foundation staff is not going to do. And these are not arbitrary decisions that are made up in the moment by staff. We're not the governing body, if you will. We're the implementation or the operational body, if you will.
Exactly. We'll make recommendations to the board and give them our input on things, especially when they ask us for it. But ultimately, the decisions are on the board on rules, on big projects, on spending. Yes, as staff and as the executive director, I have a little bit of authority on spending, but it's very limited. It's only on operating and within the budget that the board sets. Anything outside of that goes through the committee and goes through the board for final approval. So all these big projects that you see going around, community gardens, gates, streets, those are all board decisions. Staff does not have the authority to be making those type of decisions within the community. Once the board makes the decisions, we will implement and make sure that those things get done with how it was approved, but we can't be the ones to say, yes, let's go ahead and do that.
Is there anything else that you think is important for people to understand about governance in GRF?
I think one of the other misconceptions happens is the relationship between the mutuals and GRF. I think there's a lot of misconception that GRF is over the mutuals and that GRF can dictate to the mutual boards what to do, and that is not the case. We are all separate corporate entities and don't really have a say-so over each other and can't tell each other what to do. We really try to work in a collaborative way to help keep the running of Leisure World great, but ultimately GRF can't dictate to a mutual to tell them to do something.
Yes, so if you are having a dispute or something with your mutual board, GRF cannot help you with that.
No.
And conversely, if you're having a dispute with the GRF board, it's going to be very, 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 very difficult for your mutual board to assist you with that. Because there are lines and divisions of responsibility. And if something falls on one side of the line, that's the entity you have to deal with, for better or for worse.
You have been listening to Leisure World Direct.